He had the stage, the microphone, and the arrogance of 25 years. Mark Levin unleashed insult after insult, denying Jasmine Crockett even the right to finish a thought. To the audience, it looked like she was cornered, about to break. But then she turned the tables calm, precise, unstoppable. The shout was supposed to end her. Instead, it ended him. So what did Jasmine say that left Mark Levin utterly speechless? Stay with us, this is a story worth every second of your time. The studio burned under the heat of blinding lights, every spotlight locked on the round table. The audience was dead silent, not a cough, not a whisper, as if the room itself knew a storm was about to hit. Cameras zoomed in, red lights blinking, catching every twitch, every bead of sweat. It felt less like a talk show and more like the opening scene of a trial. Just minutes earlier, Jasmine's aide had leaned in close, voice sharp with urgency. "Watch out, Levin has crushed guests before just by yelling over them." The warning cut like a knife. Jasmine's pulse quickened, but her eyes stayed steady. On the table in front of her lay a thick folder, heavy with documents, the shield of truth she had prepared for weeks. Across from her, Mark Levin clutched his shining microphone, polished like a weapon. 25 years on air had made it his sword, his fortress. Tonight it gleamed under the lights, daring her to challenge him. And then he struck first, his voice detonating like a grenade. "Don't you lecture me about the Constitution." The words ripped through the silence, and in living rooms across America, millions leaned in, breath held, knowing they were about to witness an explosion. The blast of Levin's opening line still echoed in the studio, but before the air could settle, he launched his assault with brutal speed. Jasmine tried to shape her second sentence, calm and measured, but Levin lunged across her words, slicing them apart with a louder voice. He didn't wait, didn't breathe, didn't even acknowledge her presence. His words came fast, one on top of the other, hammering the air like bullets from a machine gun. Each syllable slammed into the microphone, reverberating through the speakers, as if he thought volume alone could break her down. The tempo rose with every phrase, his pitch climbing higher, his voice sharper, each interruption louder than the last. "You think you can just stroll in here and lecture me?" he barked, spittle flashing under the lights. Jasmine inhaled quietly, but her voice was swallowed before it ever left her lips. "You've been in politics for what, 2 years? 3? And suddenly you're the voice of authority?" Levin leaned forward, face flushed, eyes narrow, a predator circling his prey. "You're a rookie, Crockett. A rookie trying to play professor. Ipshuri." His hand slapped the table for emphasis, the sound cracking through the room. The message was clear. This was his arena, and he would not let her breathe inside it. The barrage didn't stop there. Levin's mouth curled into a sneer as he threw his second blade, personal and cutting. "A little congresswoman from Dallas," he mocked, drawing out the city's name with a contemptuous hiss. "And you think you can stand here and school me?" A ripple of uneasy laughter rolled from a pocket of the audience. A few clapped half-heartedly, more out of fear than amusement. But the damage was done. The sound echoed like a jeer in a boxing ring, tilting the atmosphere, pressing Jasmine deeper into the corner Levin had built for her. It felt like the crowd had chosen a side, and it wasn't hers. The studio lights bore down harder, relentless and merciless. Heat radiated from above, making the set feel less like a talk show and more like an interrogation chamber. A bead of sweat traced down Jasmine's temple, catching the glow of the cameras as it slid past her cheek. The pressure was suffocating. Her throat tightened, not from fear, but from the crushing weight of a man who would not stop speaking long enough to let her voice exist. Every second she remained silent, Levin grew louder, more triumphant, convinced her stillness was weakness. Behind the glass, the control room was chaos. The director leaned forward, jaw tight, muttering under his breath. "He's firing like a machine gun." His eyes tracked the sound meters, where the red lines spiked higher and higher with every outburst. Beside him, a young technician frowned, clicking between screens. "Look at this," he whispered, pointing at a graph. The louder Levin got, the more viewers dropped off the live feed. The audience wasn't impressed by volume. They were exhausted by it, but Levin didn't know. All he saw was Jasmine's silence, and he mistook it for surrender. Jasmine sat unmoved, her hands still resting lightly on her folder. She did not fidget, did not flinch, did not reach for a glass of water or shift in her seat. Her eyes locked on Levin with an unsettling steadiness, like glass fixed under fire but refusing to crack. Every insult he threw bounced against the wall of her composure and fell flat. She didn't roll her eyes, didn't sigh, didn't even press her lips tighter. She gave him nothing, no fuel, no reaction, no spark for his fire. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was a charge building in the air, a pressure no one could see but everyone could feel. The room vibrated with Levin's fury, but there was something else humming beneath it. The sound of restraint, the dangerous calm of a woman who refused to be dragged into a storm. To the audience, her stillness began to look less like defeat and more like defiance. Every second she held her ground, the tension coiled tighter, like a bomb waiting to detonate. The director exhaled slowly, sensing it now. Levin wasn't in control. Jasmine was. She was letting him dig deeper, letting him bury himself under the avalanche of his own noise. The microphones caught Levin's rising pitch, but the cameras caught Jasmine's unshaken gaze. That contrast, the frantic against the composed, was more powerful than any speech she could have given in that moment. The audience didn't yet realize it, but the power in the room was already shifting. The louder he shouted, the more fragile he looked. And the quieter she stayed, the stronger she became. Her silence was no retreat. It was the tightening of a fist before the strike, the drawing back of an arrow before release. Levin thought he was winning by smothering her voice. He didn't understand that he was giving her exactly what she needed. Proof that noise without substance collapses under its own weight. Levin's voice finally cracked under its own force, and for the first time he stopped to draw breath. The studio seemed to seize that pause, holding it like a fragile thread. Jasmine leaned forward, eyes steady, lips parting with surgical precision. Her voice cut through the air, calm but razor sharp. "Would you like me to answer, or are you just interviewing yourself today?" The words landed like a slap, sudden and undeniable. For a moment, silence swallowed the room. Cameras zoomed in, lenses locking on Levin's face as his jaw stiffened. The audience froze in their seats, waiting, almost afraid to breathe. The sound technicians looked at one another, baffled by the sudden absence of noise. It was the silence of a grenade right before it goes off, heavy and electric. In that stillness, Levin's power seemed to slip, his bluster caught in his throat. The camera tightened its frame, closing in on Levin's expression. His lips twitched, caught between rage and disbelief. His eyes darted sideways as though searching for an escape hatch, but there was none. The red recording light glared back at him, unforgiving. Those few seconds stretched into eternity, every tick of the studio clock echoing in the audience's ears. Viewers at home leaned closer to their screens, sensing that something historic was about to snap. Levin broke the silence with a forced laugh, harsh and metallic. His face burned crimson, his cheeks puffed as if he might explode. He leaned back in his chair, then forward again, trying to regain ground through sheer intimidation. His words spilled out, each one laced with venom. "You're just here representing the kind of people who want the police to kneel before criminals." The statement hung in the air like a poisonous cloud, raw and reckless. The audience gasped, the reaction sharp and collective. Even in the control room, the director winced, muttering, "He's gone too far." Levin thought he had cornered her, but his voice carried something he hadn't intended. Contempt that sounded too personal, too revealing. The laughter he expected from the crowd never came. Instead, the silence returned, heavier than before, as if the room itself rejected his words. Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't blink. Her eyes locked on Levin with the kind of calm that feels like a blade at the throat. Then she spoke, clear and unwavering. "What exactly do you mean by people like me? Be specific. Say it out loud." Her tone wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of a hammer. Each syllable pressed him into a corner, narrowing the walls around him. The question cracked the veneer of control Levin had tried so hard to maintain. His smirk faltered, his shoulders shifted, and for the first time he looked uncertain. He opened his mouth, then closed it, fumbling for words that wouldn't come. His eyes flicked toward the audience, then back to Jasmine, as though begging for backup that wasn't there. He stammered, half a word forming and dying on his lips. The cameras captured it all, merciless and close. In the audience, people exchanged looks. Some leaned forward with wide eyes, others shook their heads slowly. They knew exactly what had just happened. Levin had revealed something ugly, something he hadn't meant to say out loud. And now, faced with Jasmine's demand for clarity, he couldn't take it back. He could only flail, his power bleeding away with every second of hesitation. The silence after her question was louder than any shout. The air grew tight, the lights hotter, every second stretching until it felt unbearable. Levin tried to laugh again, but it came out thin, almost desperate. His attempt to pivot fell flat, his words collapsing under the weight of their own hypocrisy. What had been a storm of dominance just moments earlier was now the twitch of a man cornered, exposed. And in that moment, the power shifted. It was no longer Levin dictating the tempo with his voice. It was Jasmine controlling the stage with her stillness, her precision, and her unshakable demand for truth. The man who had once shouted her into silence was now the one shrinking beneath her gaze. The weight of silence still lingered from her last strike, but Jasmine knew the moment had come to unleash something harder than words. She reached down, her hand steady, and pulled open the thick folder in front of her. The sound of the clasp snapping echoed faintly in the microphones, a small but sharp reminder that this was no longer just talk. She flipped to a page, her eyes scanning briefly before locking back onto Levin. Her voice was calm, measured, and undeniable. According to the 2021 Federal Oversight Report, violent incidents dropped by 85% in districts that adopted independent review boards. The sentence landed with the finality of a gavel. Levin blinked, caught for a split second by the weight of the number. But instead of conceding, he leaned back in his chair, lips curling into a cruel smirk. He let out a laugh, short, mocking, sharp. Then he swung his hand through the air dismissively, like swatting away a fly. "Numbers!" he barked, his tone dripping with contempt. "People don't care about your charts, Crockett. No one cares about your percentages or your graphs. That's not real life. That's academic nonsense." His words weren't just rejection, they were derision, calculated to turn data into a punchline. The audience stirred uneasily, shifting in their seats. Some frowned, others murmured quietly, as if uncertain whether to laugh with him or recoil. In the control booth, the director raised his eyebrows. "Did he just sneer at federal data?" he muttered, almost in disbelief. A technician quickly tapped keys, and within seconds, the producers made their choice. On the giant screen behind the guests, a vivid chart exploded into view, bold bars in red and blue, stretching tall across the glowing backdrop. The title read, Federal Oversight Report 2021, Independent Review Boards, 85% Reduction in Violent Incidents. The reaction was instant. Gasps rippled across the room. A few members of the audience leaned forward, nodding slowly, their eyes fixed on the numbers illuminated in 10-foot-high clarity. The evidence was undeniable. No longer just words, but a visual hammer swung straight into Levin's fortress of noise. The contrast was brutal. Jasmine didn't even raise her voice, yet the silent power of data loomed larger than Levin's shouting ever had. Levin's laughter faltered, his smirk twitching under the weight of the glowing chart. He tried to keep his hand raised in mock dismissal, but the gesture looked hollow now, almost desperate. He chuckled again, but it rang false, a hollow sound against the wall of evidence staring him down. His contempt was backfiring, turning him not into a strong debater, but into a man sneering at proof. The more he waved his hand, the more the audience saw him waving away reality. The cameras caught every detail. Levin's dismissive grin contrasted with the towering chart behind him, creating an image that would soon be replayed endlessly. The angry host ridiculing data, while the calm congresswoman sat poised, letting the truth do the talking. It was the perfect visual irony. His arrogance became the very stage for her strength. For viewers at home, it was impossible to miss. The chart didn't just appear. It loomed over him, swallowing his noise, reducing his words to background static. Jasmine sat still, her expression composed, almost serene. She didn't press further, didn't gloat, didn't add commentary. She simply let the report's authority hang in the air like a verdict already delivered. In that moment, she understood something Levin did not. She didn't need to fight him with volume. She needed only to hold the line, to let his contempt reveal itself as weakness. The audience could see it, feel it. One side had numbers, history, and evidence. The other side had only a sneer. The tension in the room crystallized. The contrast was too stark to ignore. Levin's disdain sharpened every angle of Jasmine's credibility. His scoffing, his laughter, his theatrical dismissal, it didn't weaken her. It strengthened her. The harder he tried to wave it all away, the more the audience clung to the fact that she had given them something real, something measurable, something that mattered. 85%. 3 digits that stood like a wall against his noise. And so the atmosphere shifted again. Jasmine had not raised her voice, not once. She hadn't even moved beyond a single line of data, but it was enough to rattle the room, enough to rattle him, enough to remind every viewer across America that one well-placed fact can shake an empire of bluster. The chart still glowed behind them as Jasmine flipped to another tab in her folder, the sound of the paper snapping under her finger louder than it had any right to be. The air inside the studio was brittle, the lights unforgiving, the silence charged. Levin's last sneer still lingered, but Jasmine didn't chase it. She reached instead for something stronger, something with a name and a story that could cut through bluster like glass. She raised her eyes just long enough for the camera to lock onto her face, then lowered them again to the page. "This," she said, her voice steady, deliberate, "is the sworn statement of Officer Daniel McKenna, a 12-year veteran of the East Harbor Police Department." The words hung in the studio, precise and weighted. He was called to a domestic disturbance in April 2021, followed every step of protocol, and was accused of brutality within hours. His name, his badge, his family dragged through the mud before the truth even had a chance to surface. She pressed the edge of the page flat on the table, her fingertip holding the words steady. She lifted her gaze to the lens and continued, each syllable sharpened by control. The independent review board examined his body cam footage, the dispatch radio logs, and the forensic layout of the scene. Their findings were unanimous. Officer McKenna acted with restraint, with professionalism, and with integrity. The accusations were false. The process exonerated him, and the department issued a corrective bulletin, so mistakes like that would never happen again. Her hand turned the page, and now she read the officer's own words aloud, her voice low, quiet enough that the audience leaned forward instinctively. He wrote, "That review saved my badge and my career. It saved my marriage. It gave my children their father back. And the counseling that followed finally let me sleep without nightmares for the first time in months." She paused, letting the words pulse in the air. Transparency doesn't just protect citizens. It protects the men and women who wear the badge. The effect was devastating. The audience felt the statement in their bones, the studio thick with silence. For a moment, it was as if the lights themselves dimmed under the weight of McKenna's voice, carried through Jasmine's calm delivery. Then Levin lunged, but he was already slipping. His laugh was hollow, thin, breathless. He flicked his hand toward the folder, waving as if he could swat McKenna's testimony out of existence. "You are doing moral theater," he snapped. But the crack in his voice betrayed him. The insult came out limp, brittle, like a blade striking stone and shattering. A low hiss of disapproval swept through the seats. Then a whistle cut the air, sharp and piercing, followed by another. Audience members began shaking their heads, their faces hard. A man in the third row muttered loud enough for the cameras to catch, "That's not theater, that's a cop's life." The woman by the aisle folded her arms and glared at Levin, her eyes fixed on the glowing 10-foot screen behind him, where McKenna's words shone in stark white letters. In the control booth, the director leaned in toward the monitors. "Hold it on her," he ordered, his voice low but absolute. Every camera locked onto Jasmine's face, her stillness, her control. A young technician glanced at the analytics feed and shook his head in disbelief. "Every time Levin talks, viewers drop," he whispered. "Every time she reads, they come back." The irony was brutal. Levin's munitions were backfiring, each outburst turning into proof of weakness. while Jasmine's calm made the broadcast surge. Jasmine didn't move fast. She didn't need to. She closed the folder with deliberate care, her hands folding over it like returning a weapon to its holster. Her breathing was unchanged, her shoulders level, her gaze unbroken. She didn't gloat. She didn't jab. She let the testimony stand on its own. Officer Daniel McKenna's name now lived in the bloodstream of the debate, undeniable and unforgettable. Levin's contempt, once his shield, now looked like fear dressed up as arrogance. He had mocked evidence. He had mocked an officer's pain. He had mocked the truth. And the room, the cameras, the audience, they all saw it. The sneer that had carried him for decades was gone. In its place was something raw, exposed and collapsing. In television, they call it media suicide. And in that moment, everyone watching understood they had just witnessed it live. The audience's whistles still echoed when Jasmine shifted again, calm but unrelenting. She knew the moment had arrived to fire the most personal round she had. Slowly, she reached for a remote tucked beneath her folder, pressing the button with deliberate precision. The screen behind them flickered, and suddenly a clip rolled. It was Levin himself from a broadcast 3 years earlier, his voice booming with conviction. Transparency and accountability are the lifeblood of law enforcement. Without them, trust dies, and when trust dies, the badge means nothing. The studio gasped as his own words filled the room, like ghosts come back to haunt him. Jasmine didn't smile, didn't move. She only tilted her head slightly toward him and spoke with cutting clarity. "You once said that," she began, her tone steady, "and yet here tonight, you've dismissed transparency. You've mocked accountability. You've sneered at the very principles you used to praise. You said A then, and now you deny A. So which is the truth, Mr. Levin?" The question landed with the weight of a verdict, her voice calm but merciless, leaving him no room to dodge. The reaction was immediate. The audience erupted in a unified gasp, the sound sharp and collective, like air sucked from the room. Heads turned, mouths dropped, and even those in the back rows leaned forward in disbelief. Camera operators instinctively pushed their lenses tighter, zeroing in on Levin's face. The broadcast cut to a close-up, his skin pale, his jaw stiff, his eyes blinking too fast. The image told the story better than words ever could. Levin tried to laugh, but the sound betrayed him. It wasn't the booming confidence of a man in control. It was a thin chuckle, forced through clenched teeth. He spread his hands, searching for a shield in performance. "That clip was taken out of context," he barked, his tone strained. Then louder, almost desperate. "I was edited, manipulated. Don't trust dirty tricks like that." His words hit the air like blanks from a jammed gun, loud but powerless, stripped of impact. Jasmine moved before the echo faded, her timing surgical. She tapped her folder and spoke over him, not with volume but with precision. "This isn't an edit. This is the official transcript, recorded and aired on the Mark Levin Show, broadcast by Fox News Radio on May 14th, 2020. She slid a printed sheet across the table, her hand firm, her eyes unblinking. The camera zoomed on the page. Levin's name, the date, the network, the quote highlighted in black ink. It was irrefutable. It was his voice, his words, his past wrapped like a chain around his present. The blow landed harder than any insult ever could. The audience groaned as if they had just witnessed a knockout punch. A few clapped, others whispered furiously, but the verdict was universal. Levin's denial crumbled on contact with the evidence. His own history had betrayed him. His own words had pulled the trigger. He had just shot himself in the foot in front of the nation. Levin's hands trembled as he tried to pick up the paper, but it slipped from his grip and fluttered back to the table. His face was red now, but not from power. It was the flush of exposure, the raw heat of a man cornered. The cameras caught every flicker of his discomfort, broadcasting it in high definition to millions of homes. He leaned back, searching for a safe line to retreat to, but none came. His mouth opened, then closed again, like a man gasping for air underwater. The control booth watched in stunned silence. "He's unraveling," the director muttered, unable to look away from the monitors. A technician whispered, "She's turned his own voice into the weapon." They weren't wrong. In that moment, Levin was no longer the aggressor. He was the target, pinned down by his own contradictions. The audience sensed it too. The murmurs grew louder, some shaking their heads, others pointing at the screen where his old words replayed again in subtitles. The irony was sharp enough to cut. The man who once demanded transparency was now running from it, live on air. Every sneer, every dismissal, every mockery he had hurled earlier was now boomeranging back at him, harder and faster than he could withstand. Jasmine didn't gloat. She didn't need to. She simply sat still, the transcript before him, the clip behind him, the silence pressing in from all sides. The duel was no longer between two voices. It was between a man and his own past, and the past was winning. The transcript still lay on the table between them. Levin's name printed in bold black letters for millions to see. His denial had collapsed, his face pale under the lights. But he wasn't ready to surrender. He leaned forward suddenly, fists pressed to the desk, summoning what was left of his stage persona. His voice cracked but pushed louder, trying to claw back ground. I've been on the air for 25 years. I've interviewed presidents. I've written books that shaped policy. The declaration boomed, but it sounded less like triumph and more like desperation. He was swinging his resume like a weapon, hoping credentials might bury the wound that evidence had already left wide open. The cameras didn't flinch. They cut close on his face, catching the sweat on his forehead, the jitter in his jaw, the way his eyes darted for approval that didn't come. The audience sat stone still. No applause, no nods, only silence. For a man who thrived on validation, the absence of reaction was louder than any roar. Levin's own resume was echoing back at him like a hollow drum, impressive on paper, powerless in this moment. The more he puffed his chest, the more the room shrank around him. Jasmine moved with deliberate calm. She reached across the table and tapped the remote again, her gesture so measured it looked like choreography. The screen behind them changed, the harsh clip of Levin's past replaced by something new. A clean, white slide glowing under the studio lights. 3 bullet points appeared in bold black letters. She leaned forward, her hand resting on the folder, her voice low but sharp enough to cut through the air. Here is the bill, Mr. Levin. 3 points, 3 steps. Nothing more, nothing less. She raised her hand and pointed at the first line. Independent oversight. Every incident reviewed by a neutral civilian board, no exceptions. Accountability that answers to the people, not the badge alone. Her finger moved to the second. Mandatory report within 30 days. No endless delays, no files buried in red tape, no victims waiting years for answers. Then she drew her hand to the final point. A mental health fund for officers, because transparency should not destroy them, it should protect them. Each word landed like a nail hammered into the desk, firm, final, immovable. The studio trembled with reaction. Gasps at first, then murmurs swelling like a wave. Then, without warning, a man in the second row rose to his feet, clapping once, twice, 3 times. The sound cracked through the silence like thunder. Others followed, scattered at first, then more, until dozens of hands collided in rhythm. The rule of quiet in the studio shattered. People stood, palms pounding together, whistles slicing through the air. The cameras jerked to wide angles, capturing rows of faces lit with something Levin had not expected. Belief. It wasn't supposed to happen here, not in his studio, not on his stage. Levin froze, the color draining from his face. He tried to speak, his lips twitching into a smirk, but the words came faint, almost a whisper. You just want to go viral. His voice was weak, shaky, a thin thread buried under the storm of applause. The sentence was meant to cut, but it dissolved in the roar of hands slamming together, in the whistles and the shouts of agreement from a crowd that had turned on him. For the first time in years, his microphone was not the loudest sound in the room. The control booth scrambled to manage the chaos. We're off script, the producer hissed, but nobody cared. The director's eyes stayed locked on Jasmine's frame. Her face was calm, her posture steady, her eyes fixed on Levin like she'd been waiting for this moment all along. She hadn't raised her voice once, yet the room had risen for her. The applause wasn't just for her words. It was for the way she had stripped away noise and replaced it with clarity. Levin slumped back into his chair, hands limp at his sides, the sweat on his temples gleaming under the punishing lights. The cameras caught him shrinking, his chest no longer puffed, his shoulders hunched. His smirk faltered and died, his eyes dropped, and the whisper he had tossed like a dagger vanished into nothing. The sound of clapping swelled louder still, drowning him completely. By the time the applause finally began to fade, the verdict was clear. Levin had no ground left. His 25 years, his interviews, his booming voice, none of it mattered now. The board had flipped, the pieces rearranged, and the king was cornered. Jasmine had turned the board on him, and she hadn't needed anger or volume to do it. Just 3 points, 1 bill, and a calm that could not be broken. The applause still echoed long after the broadcast cut to commercial, but outside the studio, the story was already racing ahead. Producers clipped the most explosive 2 minutes, trimmed it to perfection, and pushed it online. The headline flashed across screens like a verdict, the shout that lost to the truth. Another version hit harder, one question that killed the noise. Within minutes, the clips were bouncing across news sites, YouTube channels, and Twitter feeds. By dawn, they were everywhere. The video had the rhythm of a scripted drama. First came Levin screaming, his fist pounding the desk, his face red under the lights. Then the turned Jasmine leaning forward, voice cutting through him with surgical calm. "Would you like me to answer, or are you just interviewing yourself today?" The silence that followed was unbearable, a silence that felt heavier than any word. Then came the final blow, the glowing chart, the testimony of Officer McKenna, and Jasmine's voice like a gavel striking. "This is the truth. You cannot laugh it away." People didn't just watch. They replayed it, studied it, shared it as if they had been present in the room. On Twitter, the clip spread like wildfire, stitched into threads, reaction posts, and breakdowns. YouTube analysts dissected the moment frame by frame, pointing out Levin's twitching hands, the way his eyes shifted when Jasmine dropped the transcript. TikTok users turned the scene into instant theater. One edit froze on Jasmine's calm face, then cut to Levin's pale silence with captions that turned it into workplace satire. Others turned her words into lip-sync challenges, set against dramatic soundtracks. The sentence, "This is the truth, you cannot laugh it away," leapt out of politics and into everyday culture. It became shorthand for anyone who had ever wanted to shut down arrogance with a single line. Levin's allies scrambled to mount a defense. On radio call-ins, sympathetic hosts argued that the clip had been unfairly cut. "They trapped him," one insisted. "The producers set him up." Others tried to blame the audience. That room was rigged against him from the start, but their defenses sounded frail, more like excuses than arguments. The problem wasn't the editing. The problem was that everyone had seen the whole thing play out live. No spin could erase the image of him sneering at evidence and then stumbling when confronted with his own past words. Meanwhile, Jasmine's supporters turned the clip into a rallying cry. Columnists described her as the embodiment of composure under fire. Nightly shows replayed the exchange with commentary that bordered on admiration. One host declared she didn't just debate him, she dismantled him. Opinion writers called it a masterclass in restraint. Online, fans shared still frames of her poised against his fury, captions reading, "Unbothered, unmoved, unshaken." It wasn't just about winning an argument anymore. It was about showing the country a different kind of strength. The line itself began to live outside the clip. "This is the truth. You cannot laugh it away." It appeared on posters, then shirts, then coffee mugs sold by online shops within 48 hours. College students painted it on signs. Memes bloomed overnight. Sports fans used it for rival teams. Employees used it in office jokes, and students used it in graduation speeches. A simple sentence born in the heat of debate had crossed into cultural territory, transformed into a catchphrase people could carry anywhere. News outlets fanned the flames. CNN ran the clip on repeat, calling it the moment calm crushed chaos. MSNBC labeled it a demolition in real time. Even Fox News, Levin's own platform, couldn't bury the footage. One commentator admitted grudgingly on air, Levin's voice was loud, but Crockett's words were louder. The split-screen replay became iconic. Levin shouting on one side, Jasmine sitting calm on the other. The contrast was too sharp to ignore. Levin tried to strike back. He went live the next evening, voice cracking under the strain, insisting, "That video was manipulated. I was edited. I was ambushed." But the delivery was shaky, his tone defensive, and the audience didn't buy it. Clips of his rebuttal went viral too, but for the wrong reasons. People paired his denials with the original footage, mocking the contrast. One popular edit played his angry protests back-to-back with Jasmine's calm line, the effect devastating. Comments piled underneath. He shouted, she whispered, we believed her. Jasmine stayed silent. She didn't chase the moment, didn't flood the airwaves with follow-ups. She let the evidence, the video, and the memes do the talking. That silence became part of her power. Every hour she said nothing, the clip grew bigger. Every day she refrained from adding commentary, her words from that night became louder. Supporters praised her restraint as proof she didn't need to manufacture outrage. She had already won, and she knew it. By the third day, the numbers were staggering. The original clip hit 10 million views on YouTube. On TikTok, reaction edits piled another 20 million. Twitter was flooded with meme, stills, and breakdowns. Opinion polls showed a surge in recognition for her name. For Levin, the story was the opposite. Plummeting credibility, endless parodies, and the permanent scar of having been undone not by a louder opponent, but by one who stayed quiet and precise. This is the truth. You cannot laugh it away. The words became a refrain across the country. Protesters carried it on signs. Commentators quoted it in headlines. Teachers brought it up in classrooms. The phrase crossed boundaries, turning from a line in a televised clash into a symbol of how arrogance collapses under evidence. What began as one woman's answer in a hostile studio had become a cultural verdict, and Levin, for all his years, for all his volume, could not erase it. His shout had become a meme, his sneer a punchline. Jasmine's calm had become thunder, echoing far beyond the studio walls. By the time the viral clip finished its sprint across phones and living rooms, its echo rolled down marble corridors and into the chambers of Congress. Staffers carried tablets between committee rooms, the frame frozen on one image. Jasmine calm, Levin silent. Members who had missed the broadcast now watched the turning points in sequence, volume low but attention high. An aide pointed at a timestamp and murmured, "Watch the 10 seconds of quiet." And a chair nodded without smiling. That quiet felt like a gavel, and it traveled. On the House floor, a representative rose during general debate and held up a printed transcript with the dates circled in black. He read the line clean and unhurried. "Would you like me to answer, or are you just interviewing yourself today?" Murmurs rolled through the chamber like a small wave against wood. Then he added, "This is the truth. You cannot laugh it away." The gavel tapped for order as side conversations sparked, and the clerk slid both quotations into the congressional record like stakes set in stone. That afternoon, the Judiciary Subcommittee on Crime convened to examine accountability standards, and the clip played on a wall monitor without narration. The camera showed Levin at full volume, then the pivot to silence, then the data slide, then the sworn testimony. A former U.S. attorney folded her hands and said, "Control of tempo matters in testimony as much as in cross." A ranking member, once skeptical, admitted the 30-day reporting rule looked like a practical guardrail, not a talking point. Staffers scribbled notes and exchanged glances as the room processed the sequence without spin. The hallway outside the hearing filled with cameras, but the mood stayed sober rather than theatrical. Reporters asked whether the exchange would harden partisan lines, and counsel shook his head. "It sharpens expectation," as he said, "not just politics." A veteran member added that clear timelines make it easier to budget and to brief grieving families and line officers. The clip had migrated from shock value to procedural language in a single morning. Across the country, the video reached precinct roll calls before sunrise, passed phone to phone by tired hands. In a Midwestern city, a police chief told his command staff, "We should be asking for the mental health fund, not waiting to be forced into it." The union president, a former sergeant, nodded and said, "Put it in writing and we will back it." They were not suddenly ideological. They were pragmatic about retention, trauma, and claims that flattened morale. A captain who once mocked counseling quietly asked for the schedule of available clinicians. City councils paid attention when chiefs and unions aligned, because budget fights soften when the talking points match the street. In East Harbor, the council chair opened a special session with a single sentence on the screen: Mental Health Fund for Officers. Personnel analysts presented numbers neither rosy nor bleak. Fewer sick leave spikes after critical incidents, fewer early retirements, fewer second divorces. A spouse spoke once, voice steady. Counseling kept our home alive. The room held still because the numbers sounded like people, not publicity. Town halls changed shape too, even if mistrust did not vanish. Residents who distrusted the department still distrusted it, but they were ready to discuss an independent board with teeth. Officers who felt used as targets still felt bruised, but they wanted a path that did not end in pills and silence. A crisis response volunteer described ride-along nights and de-escalation drills, and both sides listened without heckling. The moderator closed by quoting Jasmine, "Transparency protects not only citizens, but officers." Talk shows track the plotline, but the sharpest programs studied technique rather than cheering. A Sunday panel slowed the sequence to quarter speed and mapped the decisions on screen. The pause, the low tone, the question that forced definition, the single data point, the sworn name. A veteran anchor said, "She won because evidence arrived in the fewest words possible." A behavioral analyst added, "Breathing control is visible. Viewers read it as credibility even when they cannot name it." The lesson landed because people could see it, beat by beat. Late-night hosts built monologues around the same principle, mixing jokes with analysis. One rolled a montage of decades of televised shouting and cut to Jasmine's still frame, then looked into the camera and said, "That is how you end a noise era." Another sketched a boxing ring and labeled the moves: feint, wait, counter with proof. The biggest laughs came with the montage, but the applause landed on the words. Viewers who tuned in for mockery left repeating the 3 points of the bill. Producers at news magazines invited former prosecutors and union reps to break down what changed. The prosecutors pointed at the 30-day clock and said families would finally get dates instead of excuses. The union reps pointed at the mental health fund and said line officers would finally get help without being treated like liabilities. One episode ran the clip of the standing ovation in the studio and froze on Levin sitting small under the lights. The narrator said, "Noise lost to proof on live television," and let the image speak. Media trainers seized the moment for workshops because broadcast teaches fast and without mercy. Clips from the exchange became slide one index for corporate spokespeople, nurses' unions, and school boards. In session after session, trainers repeated 3 rules. Do not fight on volume, do not skip evidence, do not rush silence. A hospital director told colleagues, "Our next briefing will follow that cadence." The case study started in politics and spilled into every high-conflict room that touches the public. Meanwhile, Levin became a walking parable for the price of pride on air. His defenders still booked him, but their introductions softened and their eyes tracked the ratings more than his resume. Viewers recognized the stance, the sneer, and the refusal to admit the tape belonged to him, and they changed the channel. Writers condensed the story to 4 words that matched the footage. Arrogance met its ceiling. The phrase stuck because the camera had already framed the ceiling in plain view. He tried to outrun the clip by talking faster, then by talking longer, then by blaming the edit again. Each strategy looked like the last, only thinner and more frantic. When he complained about ambushes, control rooms rolled the full segment, and the complaint collapsed in real time. When he warned about performative politics, producers cut to the chart and the sworn statement. He was not only losing arguments, he was losing the settings where he once dictated the terms. Editorial pages settled on 2 sentences that traveled well. Shouting is a tactic, not an argument. Contempt is a costume, not a credential. Even commentators who disliked Jasmine's policy admitted her discipline was a professional standard. A conservative columnist wrote, "If you cannot beat a sentence, you cannot beat a bill." And the line ricocheted through feeds that rarely shared his work. The consensus was not universal, but it was heavy enough to hold. The tape looked evergreen for classrooms where rhetoric meets record. Back in Congress, staffers clipped fresh moments where members cited the exchange to anchor reforms. A senator urged colleagues to codify 30-day reporting across grant programs, holding up a draft with bipartisan co-sponsors. A representative proposed pilot funds for counseling after shootings, with independent auditors tracking outcomes and costs. None of it guaranteed easy votes, but the language moved from slogans to schedules. When a member objected that television should not set policy, the chair replied that tape is not policy, but it reveals what policy is missing. Appropriators asked budget staff to price the mental health lines with the same calm used for radios and patrol tires. Oversight members asked analysts to model how independent review boards shorten rumor cycles and reduce litigation risk. A quiet staffer measured how many agencies already produced reports in under 30 days and drafted templates for the rest. The point was not to punish, it was to standardize. The sound of governance returned, measured, and audible. For departments that stepped forward early, the feedback loop tightened quickly. Chiefs reported fewer anonymous leaks because officers believed the process would be seen, not buried. Civilian boards saw faster compliance because deadlines created muscle memory. City insurers liked the curve and lowered premiums. Families liked the phone calls that arrived on time, and chiefs liked not learning policy from headlines. On panel shows, the tactical breakdowns continued, now with practical lists viewers could screenshot. Analysts highlighted how Jasmine treated the camera as a jury rather than a sparring partner. They noted how she used names sparingly: one officer, one report, one date, so anchors could not muddy the pool. They contrasted that with Levin's choice to invoke tenure and titles, which offered authority without proof. The lesson was not partisan, it was operational and repeatable. A final round of talk radio autopsies tried to rescue Levin by arguing that passion should count for more than protocol. Callers pushed back, saying passion without proof looks like panic when the tape runs. Hosts shifted tone and asked for examples of calm that had changed minds, and callers named Jasmine, then named their own bosses, teachers, and coaches who did the same. The segment ended with a producer whispering, "We just taught debate on accident," and the host letting the silence breathe. The audience stayed through the break. In editorial meetings at big networks, segment producers pinned a short list above their desks. It read, "Ask the clear question, wait for the answer, show the evidence, zoom the contradiction, hold the silence." The list was not poetry, but it traveled faster than slogans, and it shaped calendars as surely as polls do. In the end, the story did not crown a savior or banish a villain. It carved a warning on the wall. Congress learned that clarity beats theater when the tape can be paused and replayed. Local police learned that a mental health fund is not a gift, but a guardrail that keeps skill on the job. Talk shows learned that audiences reward proof over tantrums, even when they come for fireworks. And Levin became the living case study of a truth he could not dodge. Arrogance looks powerful until evidence walks into the room. The roar from the hearings in the town halls had barely settled when a different kind of noise rose: paper, envelopes, and the soft thud of boxes hitting a carpeted floor. Overnight, Jasmine's district office turned into a mailroom, then into a small post office, then into something like a chapel. Staffers sliced open stacks with letter openers, pulled out folded notes in thick packets, and set them in neat rows across conference tables. The air smelled like ink and cardboard and coffee. Every few minutes, someone whispered, "Another one from a police family," and the room went still for a beat before the sorting resumed. They came from everywhere: Detroit, Laredo, Spokane, Savannah. A retired dispatcher wrote in careful cursive, "I have heard a lifetime of shouting on scanners. Your quiet voice felt like air." A lieutenant's brother said, "My family is not political. We are tired." A widow wrote, "My husband's badge did not protect his mind. Thank you for speaking about the fund as if it were a seatbelt." A young patrolman enclosed a photo of his newborn and a post-it note. "Please make sure I get to see her graduate." The letters did not demand, they described. Jasmine read as many as she could, then read more after the office closed, elbows on a desk marked with coffee rings. She kept a yellow highlighter next to the pile and drew thin lines under words she did not want to forget: sleep, shame, delay, scene. Sometimes she pressed a palm flat against a paragraph and breathed once before moving on. In the middle of the night, she texted her chief of staff, We need a simple guide for departments on how to file within 30 days. The reply came back instantly. Already drafting. The letters had turned policy into people and urgency into a clock. Emails poured in, but the handwritten notes hit hardest. A sergeant's mother wrote, "I know what his boots sound like when he is pretending not to limp." A spouse wrote, "He jokes at dinner so the kids won't ask why he stares at the wall." A rookie wrote, "If the review is fast and fair, I can take the heat. It's the never-ending rumor that ruins you." An officer who had left the job wrote simply, "If this had existed, I might have stayed." The message repeated in 100 voices. Transparency is not a headline. It is a handrail. Jasmine answered what she could by hand, choosing thick stationery that wouldn't bleed and a pen that forced her to slow down. She did not promise miracles. She wrote, "We owe you clarity, and you are not an afterthought. And this is what 30 days means." She added phone numbers when a line sounded like a cry that had cost someone sleep. Her staff built a spreadsheet to track themes and zip codes, but Jasmine kept a small stack on her desk labeled "Read Again." She wanted to remember who the bill was for when the cameras were gone. Across town, where the studio lights had once burned hot, the set sat in a cooler hush. Levin returned to the chair the way a boxer returns to an empty ring. Slow, measured, unsure what the ropes now meant. He looked at the shiny microphone that had always felt like armor and felt for the first time that it might be a mirror. He tried out lines in the quiet and listened to how they clattered back at him with no crowd to catch them. The silence that had humiliated him on live TV had followed him home. It lived in the cables, in the foam tiles, in the space between his breath and the red tally light. He rewatched the segment alone, thumb hovering over the pause button, stopping on the frames where his face tightened and her eyes didn't move. When he reached the part where he shouted, "I was edited!" he caught his reflection in the glass and looked away. He knew what the audience had seen. He could feel it now as an ache. Years of building a fortress out of volume had left no door for evidence to walk through. The chair under him felt smaller than it had the week before. From that quiet, the larger message stepped forward like a figure in a doorway. Volume is not truth. People had tolerated noise for years because it came packaged as confidence, as certainty, as leadership. But the clip had stripped the packaging and left the sound by itself on a table. Without proof, loud becomes thin. Without proof, loud gets tired. Evidence and transparency are the spine of trust. You can bend a story for a day, but a date stamp and a deadline will snap it straight. A clean board with independent oversight, 30-day report, and mental health fund does more than fill a segment. It draws a map. Families can walk that map. Officers can walk that map. And when they can walk it, they can breathe. Calm is not the absence of feeling. It is feeling under control. It is the breath before the counter punch, the focus that keeps a hand from shaking when the crowd surges. Calm does not mean soft. On the night of the interview, it looked like steel with a pulse. A nation that had learned to brace when the volume rose discovered that quiet can be the sharper edge. Calm makes the loudest man blink. Publishers move fast because that is what a moment does when it decides to stick. Book editors called to ask for chapters on how a pause works. Communications professors rewrote syllabi to include the sequence labeled question, wait, proof. Media trainers layered the clip into day one workshops for executives who thought they could talk forever. A textbook author called the chapter Silence as a Fact-Checking Tool and the subtitle Breath Beats Brass. The line between politics and everywhere else blurred. Talk shows turned the closing sentence into a benediction. They repeated to open and close segments about everything from supply chains to school boards. A panelist said it before a commercial break, and the music sounded different when it came back. A morning host recited it over coffee, and a split screen of headlines that had once lived off outrage looked smaller. An evening anchor ended a long segment on disinformation with it and let the camera linger on his face. No smile, just a nod. The sentence traveled because the country had already mouthed it along with Jasmine when she said it. Back in Jasmine's office, boxes kept coming, but the pace felt different, less frantic, more like a line forming at an orderly window. A high school civics teacher sent a stack of essays from students who had watched the exchange. A city clerk sent a copy of a new form stamped 30-day report. A police therapist sent a short note. The schedule filled this week. That is not bad news. Jasmine pinned 3 small sentences above her monitor. Volume is not truth. Evidence builds trust. Calm wins time. Levin stayed late one night and turned off all but one lamp. He sat in the half-light and stared at the empty seats where the audience had once sat. He imagined them not laughing, not clapping, just waiting for a reason to believe the person with the microphone. He said out loud to no one, "They were waiting." The room did not answer. The lesson did. In the edit bays and newsrooms and classrooms where the moment kept replaying, one cut rose again and again, the camera rolling back through the interview to the point where everything turned. The image sharpened, the colors settled, the mic caught even the smallest breath. Jasmine leaned forward, her voice held, the wall of noise stopped. On the screen, the words appeared in white for the people in the cheap seats and the ones watching with the sound down. The audience is smart enough to tell the truth from the noise. Editors began to print the line on the inside cover of training binders. Lecture slides ended with it in a font you could not miss from the back row. A talk show kept it on the screen behind the couch where the guest sat and let it hover above every conversation. A small museum that collects campaign paraphernalia added a screenshot to a display on the history of televised debate. The sentence slipped from clip to culture, from night of shock to long-term memory. In the end, it was not the applause that lasted or the ratings graph that told the story. It was the letters on a desk and a man alone with a microphone and a nation that found the off switch for noise when it wanted the truth. Jasmine did not win because the room liked her. She won because she showed the room something it could check. Levin did not lose because he was loud. He lost because he was loud without a ledger. The camera, impartial and relentless, taught both lessons at once. So the tape rewound, as it would for years past the interruptions, past the boasts, past the sneers to the frame that made the country lean in. The line held steady. The breath did not waver. And the voice, low and exact, said the thing that turned a broadcast into a benchmark and a moment into a marker on the political wall. The audience is smart enough to tell the truth from the noise. The line echoed in the chamber, in classrooms, in living rooms. The audience is smart enough to tell the truth from the noise. But words on their own are not enough. A moment, no matter how powerful, needs hands to carry it forward. Jasmine knew the applause would fade unless people turned their shock into steps. She had forced the cameras to stop. She had forced a nation to lean in. But now she needed them to rise from their couches and do something more. The silence she had used as a weapon was over. The time for action had come. She stood before the microphones again, this time not in combat but in challenge. Her tone was low, not theatrical, but the urgency was unmistakable. If you watched that debate and felt anger, don't just talk about it at the dinner table. Call your representatives. Tell them you support oversight. Tell them you support a 30-day reporting rule. Tell them you support a mental health fund for officers. Don't assume someone else will make the call for you. The words pressed through the air like a drumbeat, steady, relentless, impossible to ignore. The cameras caught her leaning forward, hands flat on the podium. Do not think of this as politics. Think of it as protection for families waiting for answers, protection for officers living with the weight of trauma, protection for communities tired of rumors and cover-ups. Oversight doesn't take sides. Oversight takes responsibility. And responsibility is what makes us stronger. The clip rolled live, and even those who had doubted her before felt the edge in her tone. It was not outrage. It was demand. Across the country, organizers clipped that segment and spliced it with her line from the debate. They posted it with simple captions. Pick up the phone, send the letter, ask the question. The footage spread like fire in a dry field, forcing conversations that could not be dodged. In union halls, officers who once resisted reform nodded at the mention of the mental health fund. In town halls, parents who had grown weary of empty press conferences repeated her call for 30-day reports. She had given them a script, and now they carried it. Jasmine did not soften her challenge. Don't just share the clip, she said on a morning show. Sharing is easy. Doing is harder. If you want change, act. Flood their inboxes. Pack their voicemails. stand at their doors. This bill will not pass because people cheer on social media. It will pass because you refuse to be silent when silence is what arrogance depends on. The host sat back in his chair, eyebrows raised, knowing he had just heard something more than a talking point. He had heard marching orders. The energy built, not with fireworks, but with footsteps. College students sent mass letters to committees. Church groups printed postcards with Jasmine's 3 points and handed them out after Sunday service. Retired officers wrote op-eds saying, "This is not about punishment, this is about sanity." And in state houses, lawmakers started receiving calls not from lobbyists, but from grandparents, teachers, and factory workers repeating the same words. We support oversight. We support 30-day reports. We support mental health for officers. It was no longer a clip, it was a chorus. Levin's name still hung in the story, but now it was only the shadow, the warning, the symbol of what happens when volume replaces vision. The spotlight had shifted completely. Jasmine's call had turned the debate into a movement, and every day that passed without action added weight to her words. She had challenged them. Don't assume someone else will act, and people were proving her right. The final montage was impossible to miss. The camera rolled back one more time to her words at the hearing. The audience is smart enough to tell the truth from the noise. Then it cut to phones ringing in congressional offices, to stacks of postcards and mailbags, to families standing in line at town halls. The sound was no longer shouting or applause. It was the steady hum of a nation answering a call. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.